Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, in which I am the one and only person who ever records over unrelated footage ever. Period. My name is Isaiah, and here we talk about kind of whatever I want. And today has been exciting because Briar and I went out to City Hall and got our marriage license. Now, here in Pennsylvania, they still have some of the older laws around, and we opted to get a self uniting license instead of the one where you need an officiant to sign because right now, especially, we just want to get through the legalese. We don't want to do the reception or the vows or any of that. We just want to legally be married and put together and all of that fun stuff. And since Pennsylvania has a fairly large Amish, Quaker ish sort of population, that's why these marriage licenses still exist. Our landlady's super excited because we opted for her to be one of our witnesses, and Briar's going to get one of their co workers to be our other. It's kind of dumb because the marriage license technically doesn't take effect until the 4th, but in Briar's and my heart, we're married on the 1st today, All Souls Day, or All Saints Day. Lord, if I can't remember right now. It's been a weird morning. But I wanted to talk today a bit about cemeteries. And it's like, Isaiah, you just got married. Why do you want to talk about cemeteries? Well, Briar and I plan on, when we have our official ceremony, to get married in the Laurel Hill Cemetery, which is a pretty well known cemetery in Philadelphia. It's a gorgeous venue. It looks over the river. Don't ask me to pronounce it because I'm too dumb to pronounce it properly. Um, and we want to have the reception afterwards at the house that we end up buying and renovating for our own needs. Well, why would I want to get married in a cemetery? Well, I mean, besides the fact that I'm secretly a 12-year-old edgelord and I love ghosts and vampires and things like that, we also just really love the area. It's a beautiful scenic area. It's quiet. It's in the city still. And Pryor and I are 12-year-old edgelords who love ghosts and vampires. And actually, it's pretty neat because you look into the history of cemeteries and graveyards and you learn that these places used to not be considered such off limits. Like, I'm sure everyone knows from the very beginning, like, the place to get buried was at the church, and some of the noblemen and kings and stuff would get buried inside of the church or like under the floorboards and shit. And some of the best areas was to be buried on the east side. You basically never want to get buried on the north side, if I remember correctly. And the thing with that is the churches tended to be in the cities, and there would be stuff like the mass graves or graves would be put on top of each other, so you could have 5 to 6 coffins deep and that sort of thing. And then a flood would happen as the cities are getting bigger and bigger, and the ground underneath is becoming a little more compromised, and you'd have skeletons be washed out into the street. And then as cities continued to grow, epidemics started to happen, and people would think that the cemeteries and the graves were the sources of these epidemics. So, in the around the 1800s, the rural cemeteries started becoming more popular. And if you know your history, that's right in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. So, of course, it makes sense that as more people are getting born and dying, then you have overpopulation of cemeteries and graveyards, so you want to push them out. And cities like Paris ended up creating the Paris catacombs and stuff like that too. But rural cemeteries became more popular, and that meant the bodies were taken out of the city into the outskirts and would be buried there. At the same time, people would still want to go visit the graves because these cemeteries were kind of like the first public parks. They were green areas that you could sit and eat and have a little party. And when you're in a city, there's not a whole lot of green around. So I think that's also why the epidemics were considered starting there, because you would have the dead, you would have the living having parties in close proximity to each other, so you would be getting sick from each other. And yeah, um, with the move to the rural cemeteries and in the Americas that started in about the 1830s, you also find these elaborate gateways being created as a sort of division between the living and the dead, which is pretty cool. And over time, it became less and less popular to eat or to hang out at the cemeteries because there was a lot of littering and people didn't like that, so they started banning food and things, as well as other public park spaces would start to open up. So then you could go elsewhere that didn't have dead bodies and be able to create that. So I would say, like, rural cemeteries sort of created the public parks, and that moved on to like actual public parks being made. And now we're having this new thing happen where cemeteries are being called memorial parks, and there's less emphasis on the dead and more emphasis on the living coming in. So it's sort of like these rural cemeteries went from the first public parks to being a sort of off access area back to being a public park area for people to come visit, because um, you go from the very plain, simple stones to these elaborate structures, and now we're going back towards um, these more simple stones and cremations, making things easier to keep people together and that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, people usually avoid going to a cemetery other than burials. So being able to turn this into more of a public park area, it makes sense. And along with all of this, we have had an evolution of how the bodies are taken care of, from the houses having a front parlor and a back parlor, with the front parlor being for weddings and funerals, and it being kind of super green where you just wrap the body up or you may put them in a wooden casket, to the embalming, which honestly, I don't remember how it started getting so popular, but it was this idea of the body being able to remain fresh and almost lifelike for longer. And that's become kind of the standard. And now people are getting into green burials, which is, once again, you just wrap them up very simply and put them in the ground without any chemicals or anything, or a steel concrete vault to preserve the body. So that is kind of pretty cool, and it allows the earth to take back all the nutrients that we've taken to the best of its ability, and then the land can be repurposed, or you can be buried with like a sapling, and the sapling will grow up using your body as the fuel, which I find really fascinating. And for someone who believes in spirits, which I'm honestly on the fence. I think some of my belief in ghosts comes from uh, the leftovers, the dregs of Christianity, and then the rest of it comes from the fact that I feel like I've seen and felt two ghosts in my lifetime. One being the ghost of a cat, and one being the ghost of a grandmother of mine. But I I don't know. I have always been fascinated with the line between the living and the dead, and I love the idea of being able to go to a cemetery, a historical cemetery, and celebrating the union of two lives in much the same way that these people would have done back when they were alive. And of course, making it queer as hell along the way. But I think that's all I have for today. Definitely a shorter video. That's totally fine. I'm not very picky about video lengths. I've just been too talkative in the past. But yeah, no, I'm excited. And this week I'm going to start doing the workshop, and my goal is to talk to one of the people and find out what it takes to be like an assistant or a teaching artist there. So super excited about all of that. I got a couple ideas of videos for me to talk about for this next week, and I have lots of projects to do. So, yeah, that's it for me today. I will get hydrated. Hope you all stay hydrated too, and I'll see y'all tomorrow. Bye bye.